Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone, or morning, whatever the case may be, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Every Minute Counts, Why It's Mission Critical for Nonprofits to Track Time. My name is Carrie Foster, and I'm the Director of Marketing here at Journyx. I'm joined today by Brian Maxin, who is the Director of Sales here at Journyx, and also Ann Houghtaling, who is the Executive Director at Hope Fair Housing Center. And today they'll be talking about the top reasons why nonprofits need to be tracking time, and it's not just for grants reporting, and also what such a system would look like and how you can get the information that you need out of it to further the mission at your organization. Before we get started, I just want to mention that we will have a Q&A at the end of this webinar. So if you do have any questions for our presenters today, feel free to put those questions into the GoToWebinar questions box, and we will answer them towards the end. And with that, I will turn it over to Brian to kick things off.
Awesome. Thanks, Carrie. And again, thanks everybody for taking the time to join us today. As Carrie mentioned, sort of briefly, wanted to cover sort of the 5 reasons why it's important to track time, and then get into some of the challenges with some of the time tracking options that you might have. And then we'll give you sort of a nice overview of Journyx before I turn it back over to Carrie, and Ann can give you a little bit feedback about how they do things. So getting into the actual presentation, why do you need to track time? And so we've come up with a sort of 5 reasons, and just working with some of our other nonprofit or customers and just other nonprofit prospects and organizations across the country. And the first of those is probably obvious, so that you guys can do your grant and activity accountability reporting that you need to do, but also maybe to performance, your measurement of your performance. So and wanting to go through the mission of the organization, you want to set goals around that, and being able to measure that is important. Resource planning, just make sure that you've got the right staff in place, enough staff in place. Payroll automation, so if you're talking about time tracking, not only from a reporting standpoint, but also so you can pay your employees. And then lastly, around sort of regulatory compliance, which we'll get into here in a little bit more detail. So if we sort of take those one at a time, the first one, being able to do accountability reporting against your grants. Basically what we're talking about here is being able to track time to calculate your overall costs, being able to allocate the time that you're working on different activities against different funding sources, so you can report that back to them. And then just general detailed reports to be able to demonstrate what you guys are spending time on, how much time you're spending on those different activities for your different grants. That second reason I mentioned briefly was around, so if you've got a certain mission that you're focused on driving towards for your nonprofit, to be able to get towards that mission, you want to be able to set goals for the organization. And you really want those goals to be, I guess, what they call SMART goals, right? Which is specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. And the one where time tracking probably most comes in play there is the measurable portion. So you want to be able to measure your productivity. You want to be able to make sure that your projects or your jobs or cases are staying on track, and that you're being able to measure your costs against your budgets to make sure that you're not going outside of your funding and that you're not getting off track. So time tracking is really an important component of measuring against those different goals. The third is resource planning. Again, you want to make sure that you're assigning your resources, which are your most, really your most expensive resource, against the appropriate projects that you're working on. You want to be able to make sure that you have enough staff in place, that you've got the right staff in place. And so using your time tracking for resource planning is a critical component. Payroll automation, if you're tracking time against your grants, might as well use that same time to be able to pay your employees as well. So it's really important to have a good time tracking system that not only integrates with your payroll solution, but also helps you eliminate a lot of the manual entries and just errors that are coming into play whenever you're talking about human intervention, including things like overtime calculations and stuff like that. And a good time tracking solution is just going to help to ensure that you can pay your staff quickly and, more importantly, accurately. When we're talking about time tracking, it's also important for regulatory compliance. And I think Anne will probably touch on a little bit more on the OMB Super Circular. But it's also important for things like it would be HIPAA or DCAA compliance if you're talking about healthcare, tracking time on healthcare related projects, or maybe any sort of government contracts or funding sources that you might have. And when we're talking about compliance, what it all really comes down to is making sure that your data is safe and secure. So you're going to want to pick a time tracking vendor that goes through all the security checklists, like business continuity plans, redundant backup hosting facilities, that you've got disaster recovery plans, things like that, all in place to make sure that the data that you're collecting is going to be safe and secure, especially in this age of people, hacking into all these different organizations at this time. So we sort of talked through the main reasons on why it's important to track time as a nonprofit, but it's also important to have the right system to do so. So there's some challenges that we've seen with people trying to track time in different ways. One of them is, the good old-fashioned paper timesheet. So you can imagine tracking time on paper, while it seems to be quote-unquote free, definitely has some of its challenges, right? From distributing paper timesheets out to people to trying to get those paper timesheets completed and sent back on time, whether it be by email unscanned or by FedEx or however you're getting those back. It's time consuming, and not only for collecting that data, but also for entering the data for the employee. You also have to worry about accuracy of the time entry data. So you've got people maybe scribbling in a project name, and maybe one person calls the project something different than another person. So you really have to worry about data accuracy when it comes to using paper timesheets. The second scenario has some similar challenges, but it's our good old friend using the Excel spreadsheet. So like the paper timesheet, you have a lot of manual entry. It's hard to keep the list of projects and grants and activities up to date without constantly having to update spreadsheets and email those out to people. And then you still have the big issue of trying to get those done on time, try to get those collected on time. And with both of those scenarios, you also run into the issue of being able to consolidate that data for reporting purposes. So it's really important to try to find a more automated way to collect that data. The third scenario is if you have maybe some automated system or some piece of software to collect that data, that will help. But it's also really important to make sure that that system is going to integrate with your different accounting and payroll solutions. Otherwise, your back-end staff is going to spend a lot of time trying to consolidate that data for reporting purposes, and then has to data entry that into the accounting and payroll system. And as we mentioned before, anytime you're doing data entry, it's prone to just natural errors, and having the accuracy of that in your data systems is very important. So to give you just a little feel for what Journyx looks like and how it can help. Well, we've talked about why it's important to track time. When it comes down to it, people just don't like to track their time on timesheets, right? So the most important thing is to make this as simple as possible. Give them a nice, easy way to enter their time, not only on their grants and projects and activities, but also their time on things like time off, PTO, things like that, and being able to do that all in one system. Also, giving them the ability to do that through multiple different devices is important. So being able to access through the web and even into like mobile devices, tablets, things like that as well. Journyx offers a way to sort of validate the data that's being entered into the system as well. So the idea is that you can build in different data entry validation rules so that the data that's being entered is as clean as possible. And ideally what that means is that your backend staff will really cut down on the amount of time it takes to do all the data entry corrections on the back end before you process that for payroll or for cost accounting. I mentioned being able to track time off. Journyx allows you to both calculate and display time off balances within Journyx. So people don't need to have access to the payroll system. They don't have to wait until their paycheck comes out to be able to see what their balance is. Journyx allows you to see what that balance is here all in real time. In coordination with that time off, a system like Journyx allows you to do what we call a leave request, which essentially is requesting time off in advance. So if you want to send that through a workflow process and have that reviewed and approved by a manager, that can also then be displayed on a leave calendar. So your managers, team leaders can make sure that you have enough staff working on a certain day, certain time of the day. And that just helps with staffing out your resources. In addition to time, it also is important to be able to track your expenses all in one place. So if you have reimbursable expenses for your employees, then Journyx allows you to track those expenses directly with the same interface so that you're collecting all that data in one time. And that can be sent to your accounting system for costing purposes, but also to your payroll system for reimbursement. This is just a view of our mobile app. So again, you can not only collect your time and expense data through a web interface or on a tablet, but also through a native app that we have for iPhones and for Androids. So people can do their time expense entry and also do their approvals directly through the mobile app as well as the web interface. Like any organization, people have difficulty collecting everybody's timesheets on time. So Journyx gives you the ability to have some features that allow you to sort of chase down those outstanding timesheets. We call them compliance tools. But essentially what they are user interface visuals and reports that allow you to see the status of everybody's timesheet and make sure that they're all submitted and approved in a timely fashion. I mentioned this briefly. Hopefully some of the data entry validation will help cut down on some of the data entry errors. But if not, then Journyx provides you with a real simple way to make corrective entries to existing time records, whether they've been approved or still in that open state, so that you can make sure that you got the data correct before you send it over to your accounting and payroll systems. Collecting the data obviously is very important. Making sure that that data is correct is very important. But then when it comes down to it, probably the most important thing is to be able to report on that data. So Journyx gives you a lot of flexibility around reporting through some of our standard reporting tools, including being able to filter down what you want to report on and whatever time frame you want to report on. This is an example of what one of those reports might look like. So if I wanted to maybe see all the time that we spent on different activities for a funding source, it's really easy to run that report in Journyx. And then if you wanted to even export that to Excel through one click to further manipulate and massage that data. In addition to reporting on hours, Journyx allows you to report on your costs, both labor cost and expense cost as well, so that you can see a total picture cost of your projects. Most importantly for your funding source managers, project managers, they still want to see how their projects are doing from a cost standpoint, but you may not necessarily want to give them access to the accounting or financial system. If you happen to be collecting expenses or potentially maybe even invoicing a client, Journyx also gives you the ability to attach things like receipt images or documentation to the expense or timesheets so that you can use that information to document as backup for those invoices within the application. From a resource planning standpoint, Journyx also gives you some views and reports that allows you to make sure that you're optimizing your resources on your projects. So you can help answer those questions again. Do I have enough resources to complete these activities? Maybe do I have the right resources in the right locations with the right skill sets to accomplish that work? We have an Excel plugin that we call Report Link. So as I mentioned, if you wanted to export your report to Excel to further massage it, we also have this Excel plugin that allows you basically to connect Excel directly with the Journyx database and then run pivot table and worksheet reports based on that connection. So you're not having to consistently run reports out of Journyx, export them, and massage the data in Excel. You can automate that process with this Report Link tool, which also then allows you to create things like dashboard reporting and things like that. So from an integration standpoint, just real briefly, and then I think we'll be ready to hand that off to Carrie and Ann. Journyx does integrate with many other different business applications, including different accounting systems, things like Microsoft Project, but a lot of your third-party payroll solutions like ADP, Paychex, Paycor, and many others. We do also support Canadian payroll outside of the US, but also things like your different CRM systems, your HR systems. And then we have a pretty mature and robust API web services. So if you wanted to integrate Journyx with some other business system that you're using, then the technology is there to do so. All right, at this point in time, I think it's ready to turn back over to Carrie, and she'll have a conversation with Ann.
Great. Thank you so much, Brian. Appreciate it. As I mentioned before, we have Ann Houghtaling from Hope Fair Housing Center, and I'll just be asking you a few questions. Hi, Ann.
Hi, Carrie.
How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
So first question that I had for you, if you could just talk a little bit about what the mission of Hope Fair Housing Center is and what is your role there?
So Hope Fair Housing Center works to create greater housing opportunities for all. We ensure that everyone has the same right to a home or community of their choice, regardless of race, color, religion, sex, national origin, disability, or because they have children in their family or other state or local protection. And we accomplish all this through education and outreach, public policy advocacy, investigation, enforcement, and training and consulting. And so we have a variety of different programs and services, and I'm the executive director at Hope.
Excellent. And Hope is, full disclosure, is a customer of Journyx. But outside of being a user of Journyx, I know you're a pretty big believer that nonprofits really need to be tracking time and expenses. Can you talk a little bit more about why that is?
Well, from our perspective on the work that we do, there are a variety of different requirements of activities that may or may not be allowed, or funders that want documentation of how you're leveraging your resources. Are you working with it? We may need to be tracking time on a particular case or investigation, and so and then we can get into a little bit more on the government requirements if you get federal funding, but there are time and effort reporting requirements that you're going to need for your funders. And Journyx is it's a robust tool to be able to kind of slice and dice all of the information that you need for case reporting or for funder reports or for government compliance. So I just feel like everybody, to make sure that you're really being effective in how you're getting things done, having that time reporting is so critical.
And you were just talking about federal requirements, and earlier Brian mentioned the OMB Super Circular. Can you explain how tracking time helps nonprofits to meet those specific requirements?
Yes. So there's always been federal requirements about what are allowable costs and things like that, but the Super Circular now talks also about more sort of robust requirements related to time and effort reporting for federal funds. And so the reporting, the timekeeping that we do with Journyx, and the fact that staff do it every 2 weeks with payroll, and you can set the time to whatever your payroll is, right? Whether you do it twice a month or every 2 weeks or however you do it, but you can set it, and then I or another manager can review and approve the timesheets as well, and we can get a good idea on time and effort reporting, and is it reasonable for the funding that we're receiving. It also, there are certain things that aren't allowed. You can't do fundraising with federal funds, right? And so if your Journyx system is set up, or your timekeeping system is set up to track time that you spend on fundraising, you can make sure that it's not allocated to a federal grant. And then the other thing that we've done for transparency purposes, if you do a budget to a funder or to a federal government agency, and you put in somebody's hours, as the budgets for all these different things are based on 2,080 hours a year per staff person. That's a full-time 40-hour work week for 52 weeks. Some of that may be vacation, but for your staff. If you then only allow your staff to put 80 hours of time in a time period, right, every 2 weeks, without a doubt that you can't be double counting time. You can't be allocating a staff 80 hours to this grant and 80 hours to that grant. They only get 80 hours to put in. So you're not double counting. And it gives you and your funders some assurance that you're also properly allocating across funding centers.
Okay, great. And so, you've been talking about how you use Journyx, and so let's do a little bit of an overview of that. So, how long have you been using Journyx at Hope Fair Housing? Overall, actually, I think you started out using us at National Fair Housing Center. Is that correct?
Yes, I started out using Journyx through the National Fair Housing Alliance about, I want to say, like 15 years ago, close to. And so when I was moving from NAFA to Hope about 7 years ago, I wanted to be able to have that same sort of really great system of timekeeping and reporting and the ability to generate the reports that I needed. And so we were able to use the architecture, and Journyx customized it specifically for us so that it really suited the local organization needs.
And before you started using Journyx, what were you using to track time?
So over time, various different things, but mostly tracking time through staff calendars with time spent and expenses, or through separate logs in individual case files, or paper timesheets. I mean, sometimes Excel, but it was just sort of, there were various different ways of collecting time that were scattered.
All right, the nefarious paper and Excel spreadsheet timesheets, they can be very difficult to keep track of. So that you mentioned some of the challenges with that. They were in disparate locations, and so how and plus just all the other challenges that are involved with keeping track of time in spreadsheets and on paper timesheets that Brian talked about. So how did Journyx help you to overcome those challenges?
So part of it is that they're required to be contemporaneously kept by the staff, and you can see if people are keeping their time. And they're required to be submitted every 2 weeks, and you go through an approval process, and you look and make sure that somebody is allocating the right time to the right grant or project or cost or whatever it might be. And so all of the staff you're aware of where they are, and it helps maintain the discipline related to keeping time. But then also, as a nonprofit executive, anybody who works in a nonprofit, you're mission driven. You don't want to be doing anything that takes too much time to do to take away from the work that you need to be doing, right? You need something that is efficient, that meets your needs, that is easy to do, and you don't spend so much time on administration that you don't get the really important work that you need to get done. This does that, and because the architecture is set up to meet our different needs about case time, or about whether it came, whether the funding was through the county or a foundation or a federal source, you can run a report based on the quarter that you have for a particular grant, or for the entire year. You can, if there's a specific activity that you need to report on, like for us, sometimes we need to report on intakes that we do for people that are English as a second language. You can run a report on that intake time. So it just has solved a lot of problems and makes it so easy for us to be able to produce the documentation that we need for a variety of different purposes.
Great. And yes, I mean, like you mentioned, it's important that you're able to focus on what the mission of the organization, what's most important. And so you don't want to have to deal with all that administrative stuff. Hence, why every minute counts. So is there anything specific, my last question, is there anything specific that you find most useful about Journyx?
There are a few things, really, honestly, that it's really user-friendly and intuitive. It's very easy for staff to pick up and get to know it. That you can build the architecture of the system for the categories that you specifically need and want for your organization, whatever it might be that you need to report on. And the reports that you can generate through Journyx are really user-friendly as well. And based on your architecture, there are just so many different ways that you can get the data that you need. And so it makes it really, really easy. And I think lastly, like I said, it's a discipline that, the staff knows that they have to submit it every 2 weeks. A supervisor has to review and approve and make sure that the appropriate allocations are being made. So you know that you're on top of your time and effort reporting for whatever reason you need that.
Great. Thank you so much, Anne. Really appreciate your insights. And now we're going to have a Q&A, and we do have a few questions. So either one of you can jump in and answer on these. The first being, can Journyx be implemented without driving an organization's payroll costs? Or in other words, can it be implemented as a standalone product outside of payroll?
Yeah, I'll take the Journyx related ones, I guess, and if you want, unless you want to jump in. So you do have the ability to implement Journyx standalone, and really it is a standalone product. But what it has the ability to do is integrate with your different payroll systems. So you collect the time in Journyx, and then we can export that time out to like an ADP or Paycheck, so that you can process payroll.
But this is Anne. I do want to mention that there are different features that cost different prices with Journyx, right? And so you can elect to have it talk to your QuickBooks, or you can elect to have it generate reports for you and then go ahead and enter that into QuickBooks, depending on whatever your price point is for the services.
Great, thanks. And our next question, does the Journyx system, is it on the cloud? Is it a physical install? And if it's in the cloud, can Journyx guarantee where the data is going to be saved and transferred?
Yeah, so we offer, so it's a web-based application either way, but we do offer both a hosted cloud solution and then what I'll call an on-premise solution, which is basically having Journyx installed on the server at your place. If you host with Journyx, then we have a hosting facility here in Austin, but we also have a redundant backup facility that's hosted in Little Rock for any sort of disaster recovery or issues that we have if our main center goes down here in Austin. And so your data is stored in databases that are hosted in one of those two environments.
Great, I just got a couple more questions. What kind of info could be pulled from Journyx or from a time tracking system that could be used for different kinds of reporting requirements. So basically, what can you get out of Journyx that are going to help you to meet those all-important regulatory compliance requirements, basically?
Yeah, sure. That's a bit of a general question, but the short answer is based on how you configure Journyx, which will be based on what your requirements are. Any data element that you track within Journyx, your hours or expenses against, you have the ability to report against that with the standard reporting tools. And then, as Anne mentioned earlier, just the ability then to sort of slice and dice that information in any way that you need to for whoever's looking for that information.
Okay, and our last question, and either one of you might be able to answer this one. Can the time tracking data also be used in litigation cases and for litigation purposes?
This is Anne. We have used it. When there's questions, when we spend time on a case, the question is, how do you know you spent that time on the case? Well, we've been tracking it contemporaneously all along, and so I can pull a report from Journyx that identifies the exact hours that we've spent on it. So it's very helpful from that standpoint.
Excellent. Brian, did you want to jump in?
No, I think Kane covered it great. Thank you.
Excellent. All right, well, thank you so much. That was our last question, and so we will end the webinar here. Thank you for attending today. This has been recorded, so we will be making this recording available on our website and emailing it out to you as soon as it's ready. And have a great rest of your day. Thank you again for attending.
Thanks, Anne.
Thanks, guys.